Nita had lived most of her life between campfires and canyons, traveling with relatives and friends of her clan, moving whenever the seasons shifted or whenever the world felt too close. People often mistook her wandering life for freedom, but Nita knew better. She didn't keep moving because she wanted to. She kept moving because she was afraid that staying would mean losing something. Again. Fear disguised as freedom was a lesson she'd learned early. Her father had gone missing when she was 16. A strong, grounded Apache hunter, he had set out to explore a strange patch of land on the northern ridge, an area people whispered about, a place the old ones said carried a restless heartbeat. He promised he would return by morning. He never did. All they ever found were his tracks heading toward the mountain. Nothing returning. For years, Nita avoided that part of the region. Some losses were too sharp to be revisited. So when a letter came addressed to her, her name written in a stiff, unfamiliar hand, she opened it slowly, expecting nothing and hoping for even less. Inside was a single sheet of paper from a law firm in Boise. The letter was politely worded, but the message was almost unbelievable. A man named Thomas Hadley had left her a piece of property, a full homestead, for exactly $1. Nita blinked at the page, reading it twice. She had never heard of this man. Hadley was not Apache, not family, not clan. But the law was clear. She owned a mountain farm now. When she traveled into town to meet the lawyer, a stiff, pale man with brass spectacles, he handed her an envelope of keys and a thin folder of land transfer papers. His voice was careful, measured, almost nervous. He was a peculiar sort of fellow, Miss Nita. Kept to himself, lived up there a long time, strict about who he let near that property. The lawyer cleared his throat. His instructions were very specific. You were to have it. You and no one else. Nita frowned. Why me? He hesitated, then lowered his voice. Mr. Hadley once said that mountain took more from him than it gave, and that, well, it was the kind of place that could make a man disappear if he wasn't careful. A shiver crept along Nita's spine, uninvited and unwelcome. Disappear? It's not for me to say, Miss Nita, but consider this a warning, not just a deed. 2 days later, Nita saddled her paint horse, Sky, and rode toward the northern ridge, the same direction her father had taken on his final morning. The trail wasn't friendly. It climbed in steep, stubborn switchbacks, the kind only old trappers or desperate men would bother with. Pine needles crackled under Sky's hooves. Thin ribbons of frost clung to the edges of fallen logs. By late afternoon, the wind grew sharper. The cold was the kind that bit straight through leather and bone. Wild, indifferent, unforgiving. Nita pulled her coat tighter and urged Sky onward. At last she reached the homestead. The cabin stood alone against the wide, empty sweep of land, its silhouette dark and weather-worn. The boards were old but still strong. A single lantern hook hung crooked beside the door. The barn sagged slightly, its roof patched in places. A rust-eaten water pump leaned beside a trough filled with pine needles. It looked like a place a man might run to, or hide in, or die alone inside without anyone knowing for years. The air around it felt still, watchful. Nita dismounted slowly. Every instinct she possessed, the instincts sharpened by years of living close to the earth, told her this mountain was not ordinary. The wind here carried stories, old ones, wounded ones. And somewhere beneath the soil, something waited. She stood at the threshold of the cabin, fingers brushing the cold metal of the key. Why her? Why would a stranger choose a young Apache woman to inherit a place like this? And what had this mountain taken from Thomas Hadley that it had once taken from her father too? Why had she been given a mountain she had never even known by name? The cabin groaned softly when Nita stepped inside, as if the place exhaled after years of waiting for someone to return. Dust floated in pale shafts of light cutting through the boards. The air carried that cold, metallic scent old places held, like history had settled into the grain of the wood. She paused, listening. The silence was thick, unyielding, almost watchful. A table stood near the window, its surface cluttered with yellowed papers, torn maps, and a rusted tin box with a broken latch. Someone, likely Hadley, had lived here the way desperate men do. Quickly, quietly, always looking over his shoulder. Nita pushed the tin box open. Inside, wrapped in brittle cloth, lay something unexpected. An old brass bullet casing, hollowed out and sealed with wax. She shook it gently, hearing a faint clink inside. Her pulse tightened. When she pried it open, a small black USB drive slid into her palm. She didn't move for a moment. This wasn't the kind of thing her people stored in bullets or hid in cabins. This had the scent of trouble, the kind of trouble that swallowed men whole. As she spread the papers across the table, she found maps covered in shaky pencil markings, circled coordinates, warnings scribbled in the margins. Some belonged to Hadley, but others carried handwriting she recognized. Sharp, steady, Apache, her father. He had walked these same paths, left these same marks. Each note felt like a small pulse beneath her fingertips. One page, written in English but shaped by the hand she knew too well, read, "If anyone finds this, the caves go deeper than we thought. Hadley says we're close. I hope he's wrong." Nita sat back, breath unsteady. Her father hadn't wandered off or gotten lost like people whispered. He had been with Hadley. He had been investigating something dangerous. And whatever it was, it had followed her here. Nita slid the USB into her pocket and climbed the narrow stairs to the loft. There she found more notebooks, some filled with geologic sketches, some with rambling confessions from Hadley's final months before disappearing. Every page felt heavier than the last. One entry stood out more than the others. "If they find what's under this land, they'll tear this whole mountain open. I can't let that happen. If I don't make it, give the land to someone who won't sell. Someone who won't sell. Someone who can't be bought." A chill swept through her. Was that why he chose her? Because she was Apache? Because her people had always been the ones who refused to trade sacred land for money, promises, or fear? She returned to the table and studied the maps again. Beneath Hadley's notes and her father's markings were sketches of caverns, vast, jagged, layered chambers with mineral deposits drawn like shimmering roots. Red pen circled one section repeatedly. Beside it, value unknown. Possibly millions. Possibly more. And under that, in her father's harsher handwriting, not meant for them. Her skin prickled. When darkness settled outside, she lit the old oil lamp and plugged the USB into her small portable reader, the one she carried on long rides to review tribal history recordings. The device flickered, then opened a mess of files. Her breath caught. There were scanned contracts, email chains discussing illegal land deals, audio clips of men negotiating bribes with government officials. Vanguard Resources wasn't just a corporation. They were a predatory force, swallowing land and silencing anyone who stood in their way. Then came the photos: burned tree lines, destroyed campsites, camera shots of men watching from ridges through scopes, license plates belonging to contractors paid in cash. Her stomach twisted. And then, geology diagrams, precise, professional-looking overlays of the mountain's interior, showing deposits of rare earth elements worth unimaginable sums. Whoever controlled those caves controlled a fortune big enough to make a man disappear, big enough to make her father disappear. She stared at the dim screen until her eyes burned. Suddenly, everything aligned. The inheritance, the warnings, the maps, her father's notes. Hadley hadn't chosen her out of sentiment. He had chosen her because Apache families had resisted mining corporations for generations. Because her people were the last ones who wouldn't be bribed or threatened into silence. Because someone needed to stand between this mountain and the kind of men willing to burn forests for profit. The weight of that truth settled onto her shoulders like a cold, unyielding cloak. Nita closed the laptop, the room now unbearably quiet. Outside, the wind scraped along the cabin walls like fingernails dragging over old wood. She wasn't just inheriting land. She was inheriting a fight her father had died walking into, a fight Hadley had tried to escape, and now it had found her. Nita sat alone in the dim cabin, the USB warm in her hand, realizing with sudden clarity she had just stepped into the same world that took her father's life, and it wasn't going to let her walk away. The next morning broke cold and colorless, the kind of brittle Idaho dawn where the air feels sharp enough to cut skin. Nita stepped out of the cabin with Sky's reins in hand, planning to haul water from the pump. But she stopped after 2 steps, her breath hanging in the air. Footprints. Not hers. Not Sky's. Fresh ones. Pressed into the thin layer of frost like they'd been made only hours before. The stride was long, steady, purposeful, circling the cabin as if someone had been examining the place, or examining her. A slow, simmering unease crawled up her spine. She crouched, brushing her fingers over the tracks. The edges were crisp. Whoever made them had been here late in the night. Maybe while she slept only a few feet away, her back turned to the window. She rose to follow the trail. It led toward the tree line, then doubled back toward the cabin. The stranger had paused by the side wall, close to the window of the loft, where she had spent half the night reading her father's notes. From here she could see it, an ash-gray smudge by the sill. Someone had stood right outside her bedroom window, smoking. Nita's jaw tightened. Every Apache instinct she carried, those sharpened ancestral instincts, flared alive. Someone had been close enough to watch her silhouette against the lamplight. Someone confident enough to stand still in the dark, without fear of being caught. Someone familiar with stalking prey. She knelt and picked up what remained of the cigarette, half smothered, crushed into the dirt. The tobacco wasn't local. The scent was harsh, bitter, and industrial. The type men in rough trucks smoked on long night shifts. She whispered into the cold air, "You shouldn't have come this close." Barely an hour later, Nita heard wagon wheels on the road below. These mountains didn't get many visitors. Travelers didn't climb this far unless they had a reason or a warning. She watched from the porch as Faye Drummond made her slow way up the hill, wrapped in a heavy shawl, her face pale and pinched. Faye had always looked like the kind of Western woman carved from stubborn oak, solid, weathered, unbreakable. But today she looked thinner, as if something had scraped pieces of her away. Nita walked down to meet her. "Morning, Faye." The older woman swallowed, eyes glassy. "Nita, I shouldn't be here this early, but I came as soon as I could." "What happened?" Faye's lips trembled. "Dennis passed last night." A quiet thud knocked inside Nita's chest. Dennis Drummond had been one of the only white men in the valley who treated Apache folks with decency and fairness. A rancher with rough hands and a gentle voice. He was one of the last people her father had trusted. "I'm sorry," Nita said softly. "He was a good man." Faye nodded hard, unable to speak for a moment. When she finally gathered herself, she reached inside her shawl and pulled out a folded scrap of paper. This was the last thing he said to me, right before he went." She handed Nita the note. The handwriting was messy, so unlike the precise, deliberate script Dennis usually used. "Keep an eye on that Apache girl. She's walking the same path Hadley walked." Nita exhaled slowly, the cold air burning her throat. Faye's voice cracked. "He said you were in danger. He said, whatever happened to Hadley wasn't an accident. And you've stepped into something heavy, child. Something mean." Nita looked toward the tree line, where the stranger's tracks disappeared into shadow. "He wasn't wrong." Faye clutched her arm. "If you need anything at all, you come down the valley, promise me." Nita squeezed her hand. "I will, thank you, Faye." But the truth was already settling deep in her bones. There was no help coming. Not for this. Not for her. The fight Hadley ran from, and her father died in, had found her doorstep. Faye climbed back onto her wagon, and Nita watched until she disappeared down the road. Only when the wind swallowed the last clatter of wheels did Nita finally turn back to the cabin. Inside, the silence felt different now. Heavier, watching, crowded with invisible footsteps. She closed the shutters one by one, her movements deliberate. Every breath tightened her chest. Someone had stood outside her window last night. Someone unafraid. She knelt beside her travel pack and reached inside. Her fingers wrapped around the worn, familiar handle of her father's hunting knife. The same one he carried whenever he scouted dangerous terrain. The blade was old, Apache-made, sturdy and steadfast, shaped for both survival and warning. Nita stood, walked to the front door, and locked it with a firm, decisive click. The world outside had sharpened its teeth. She wasn't running anymore. She tightened her grip on the knife, its weight grounding her. Whatever took her father, whatever chased Hadley into hiding, had come to her now. The day never warmed. Even by late afternoon, the cold held tight to the mountain, the kind of sharp, unyielding chill that made every sound clearer, every movement louder. Nita spent the morning pacing the cabin, sorting the documents she'd uncovered, spreading maps and USB printouts across the rough wooden table. She moved with a purposeful calm, one she didn't fully feel inside. The truth was tightening around her like a vice. Her father had died for this. Hadley had vanished for this. Now strangers were circling her cabin at night. She needed allies, and she needed them fast. She slid her phone from her saddlebag, hands steady despite the pulsing fear underneath her ribs. There were 3 people, only 3, she could trust to handle something this dangerous. Sarah Brennan, the closest thing Idaho had to a fearless frontier lawyer. Marcus Webb, a stubborn investigative journalist who'd spent years exposing corporate rot. And Dr. Elijah Oakes, a geologist whose reputation was as rugged and solid as the mountains he studied. Nita dialed Sarah first. The call connected almost instantly. "Nita, you're calling from the ridge. Everything all right?" Sarah's voice carried that firm, unshakable tone Nita had relied on before. "I need your help," Nita said. "It's about Thomas Hadley and about my father." There was a beat of silence. Then Sarah answered, "Tell me where to meet you and bring whatever you found. I'm coming." Next, she called Marcus. He answered with the energy of a man who spent half his life chasing danger. "Nita Hale? Hell, I've been waiting for your call." He sounded alert, almost eager. "You said Hadley left you land. Did you find anything else? Anything strange?" "More than strange," she replied. "I have evidence, files about Vanguard." The line crackled as Marcus sucked in a breath. "Send me nothing. Not over the air. I'm driving up there tonight. Keep the documents safe." Lastly, she dialed Dr. Oakes. The man wasn't known for warmth, but he was known for truth. When he picked up, he spoke cautiously. "Nita, it's unusual to hear from you outside tribal work. What's going on?" "I found geological maps, cavern layouts. My father worked on this with Hadley. Vanguard wants what's under this mountain." Dr. Oakes' tone shifted instantly. "I'll bring my equipment. I want to see those caves with my own eyes." 3 calls, 3 answers. 3 people ready to fight beside her. It felt like the mountain was shifting beneath her feet, but this time in her favor. Evening rolled in, stretching long shadows across the snow-packed yard. The sky burned orange, then purple, then a dark, brooding blue. Nita fed Sky and checked the cabin windows for the 3rd time. She told herself she was being careful, not afraid. But the truth was simpler. She didn't like being hunted. By the time night fully settled, a strange hum echoed from the forest. Not the wind, not an animal. Something mechanical, something creeping up the ridge. Nita stepped onto the porch. Down the slope, far enough to stay hidden but close enough to see, 2 headlights flickered through the trees. The low, rumbling growl of an engine rolled across the valley. A truck, a big one. Its lights cut through the branches, slow, deliberate, sweeping the landscape like a predator searching for movement. Then she saw him. Kemp. She recognized him from the photographs in the Vanguard files. Mid-40s, scar on his chin. A man with a reputation for handling problems for the corporation. His silhouette leaned against the hood of the truck, broad-shouldered, cold-eyed, the kind of man who moved like he owned everything he stood on. He wasn't trespassing, not yet. He was waiting, watching, testing her. The truck's beam slid across her cabin door, then back toward the trees. Kemp kicked snow off his boot, lit a cigarette, the flame briefly illuminating his sharp features. She could smell the same harsh tobacco she found outside her window that morning. Her chest tightened. He had been up here last night. Nita didn't step back, didn't hide. She stood tall on the porch where he could see her silhouette against the lantern glow. For the first time in her life, after years of running, drifting, avoiding anything that reminded her of loss, she didn't move. She didn't flee. She planted her boots firmly in the snow. Kemp flicked the cigarette to the ground, grinding the ember out with his heel. Even from a distance, she could feel his stare, measured, assessing, dangerous. Then he turned, climbed back into the truck, and the engine roared to life. The headlights swung wide as he reversed slowly down the mountain road, disappearing into the dark like a wolf slipping back into its den. Nita remained on the porch long after the sound faded. Her breath fogged the air in small, steady clouds. She'd drawn a line tonight, and he'd seen it. Whatever storm was coming, whatever battle her father and Hadley never lived to finish, had finally reached her doorstep. But this time, Nita wasn't alone, and she wasn't running. The ridge was still frozen when Nita left the cabin at dawn, her breath drifting in pale clouds as she crossed into the deeper stretch of forest. The cold here was different, sharper, quieter, carrying a heavy stillness that belonged only to places untouched by people. Pine needles cracked softly under her boots. Frost dusted the fallen branches like powdered glass. Somewhere far off, a lone raven called, its voice echoing across the rugged slope. She kept Hadley's map folded in her pocket, though she'd already memorized every strange marking on it. Her father's coded symbols, Hadley's jagged notes, the layered circles that indicated the entrance to the caves. The markings ran like a secret trail only two men had ever followed, and now she was the third. Her father had walked this exact path, so had Hadley, and neither man came back the same. Nita pulled her coat tighter and pressed onward, following the rough notches carved into bark, her father's handiwork. They were old, worn by seasons, but unmistakably Apache. Reminders he'd been here, proof he had fought to leave a trail. "How close did you get?" she whispered into the wind. A fallen branch snapped under her boots. The forest seemed to listen. She reached a steep clearing where boulders jutted out like weather-beaten guardians. Behind them was a narrow slit in the rock. Easy to miss unless you knew what to look for. Hadley's map had circled it. Nita slipped inside. The air changed immediately, cooler, denser, carrying the raw scent of stone that had never seen daylight. Her lantern beam slid across walls streaked in mineral veins, gray, red, and pale white like bone. The ground sloped downward in a gradual, winding descent. She kept walking. After several minutes, the passage widened, opening into a chamber so vast the lantern's glow barely reached the ceiling. The limestone formations rose like cathedral pillars, tall and ancient, carved by centuries of dripping water. Nita stood still, awe sweeping through her chest. This wasn't just a cave, it was an entire world. Hadley had found this. Her father had too. She saw signs immediately. A collapsed tent, an old tin cup, blackened stones from a fire pit, Hadley's camp. Dust coated everything, but the shape of the campsite remained unmistakable. A bedroll half buried under rock. A notebook fallen open to a page warped by moisture. These were the last traces of a man who knew he was running out of time. Nita knelt, touching a stone near the fire pit. It was cold, unmoving, but she could feel something else. Resolve, the stubborn echo of a man refusing to let the truth be buried. Beyond the campsite lay a narrow tunnel. She followed it carefully until it spilled into a second, even larger cavern. Her lantern light skimmed across the floor, and she froze. Everywhere around her were scattered pieces of ore, jagged chunks of rock split open to reveal streaks of rare earth minerals glowing faintly under the lantern's warm light. Purples, blues, deep metallic greens, colors she had never seen in natural stone before. Worth millions, maybe more. The kind of wealth corporations like Vanguard would kill for. Her heart drummed hard in her chest. Her father hadn't been chasing ghosts. Hadley hadn't been paranoid. They had stumbled into something monumental, something powerful enough to shift the future of mining, of technology, maybe of the entire country. She moved deeper. At the far end of the cavern lay a smaller, oddly shaped stone pedestal. Sitting on top was a shard of crystal unlike anything she had ever seen. It pulsed faintly, reflecting the lantern's glow with a magnetic sheen, almost as if it carried a heartbeat. Nita lifted it carefully. The crystal hummed, quiet, eerie, alive in a way that made her breath catch. This was the thing her father had mentioned in his final note. The one piece he said they shouldn't disturb. The piece Hadley believed would bring the wrong kind of attention. Nita's hands trembled, not with fear, but with understanding. Hadley wasn't delusional. Her father wasn't superstitious. They had found a treasure the world would tear itself apart to control, a treasure hidden beneath a lonely mountain, now left in her hands. She stepped back, lifting the lantern high. The light struck the walls, bouncing off mineral veins, catching on the strange crystal until the whole chamber flickered with a wildfire glow. In that moment, standing alone in a cavern older than memory, Nita felt both small and immensely chosen. She tightened her grip on the gleaming shard. Whatever storm was coming, this was the spark that would ignite it. Nita stood in the heart of the cave, lantern light reflecting off the crystal, the glow burning like living fire in her hands. Snow was falling in thin, drifting sheets when Nita climbed out of the cave and stepped back into the open air. The sky above the ridge was a pale, washed-out gray, the kind that promised a hard night and harder morning. Her boots sank into fresh powder, too fresh. And there, carved through the white surface like a scar, were tire tracks. Deep, heavy, recently made. Nita crouched, pressing her gloved fingers against the compressed snow. The engine heat had melted the edges. Whoever had driven through had left minutes ago, maybe an hour at most. A cold wind slipped down the mountain, biting the side of her neck like a warning. She followed the tracks a few yards before spotting more signs. A broken pine limb, a boot print beside it, another cigarette stub, the same harsh brand Kemp smoked. Someone had used the ridge as a vantage point, close enough to watch the cabin, close enough to see her leaving for the caves. Someone patient, someone with orders. The mountain groaned under the wind, and Nita whispered a quiet apology to the land, as her elders taught her. "I'm bringing trouble home." When she reached the cabin, Skye whinnied uneasily, pacing near the corral with her ears pinned back. Animals always sense danger long before people did. Nita stroked her flank, whispering reassurance neither of them believed. Inside, she shut the door and bolted it, the hinge echoing through the quiet room. The cabin felt smaller than ever, tight, shadowed, holding the weight of secrets now too large to contain. She set the lantern down and pulled out the USB drive. Hadley's last hope, her father's final trail, Vanguard's deepest sin. She wasn't losing it, not now, not to them. Nita powered up her old laptop, the screen flickering with the stubborn glow of outdated machinery. She copied the entire USB folder, every map, every financial record, every geologic diagram, onto 2 separate drives. The first she labeled with shaky hands, Faye. Faye Drummond had earned more than trust in a single morning. She'd earned a place in this fight. The grieving widow deserved the truth behind her husband's death. And more than that, she deserved a chance to protect herself. Nita packaged the drive in a wax paper envelope and tied it shut with leather cord. She'd deliver it by sundown. The second copy went to Stella Larson, an old friend in Portland who worked with independent environmental lawyers. Stella was loud, fearless, and had a habit of picking fights with corporations that underestimated her. If things went bad here on the mountain, Stella would take these files and burn Vanguard from the outside. Nita sealed the second envelope tight. Then came the third copy. Her father used to tell her, "If you want something to stay hidden, hide it in plain sight." So she stepped out into the icy wind, climbed onto the porch rail, and shoved the final USB deep into the hollow of a longhorn steer skull mounted above the cabin door. Bleached bone, weather-worn, unnoticed by men who didn't understand symbols. She tapped the skull twice, the way her father once did. "Guard it." Dusk crept in early, sliding down the mountain like a slow-moving storm. The ridge darkened, the pines turning to silhouettes. Nita was cleaning her father's knife, her steady old companion, when she heard it. Engines. More than one. Their growl was low, predatory, rolling across the land in a steady, unbroken rumble. Skye bolted inside the corral, kicking at the gate. Nita blew out the lantern and moved to the window, sliding the curtain aside with careful fingers. Headlights pushed through the trees. One truck, then a second, then a third. They didn't bother hiding this time. Kemp climbed out first, broad-shouldered, rigid, wearing that crooked half-smile of a man who thought he owned the world. 3 Vanguard contractors followed behind him, armed with flashlights and the kind of confidence that came from believing no one on this mountain could stop them. They crossed onto her land without hesitation, boots crunching snow, hands resting near holsters, eyes sweeping the cabin like they were already picturing it empty. Nita stepped onto the porch before they could come farther, the cold whipping her hair across her face. She didn't flinch, didn't back away. Her heartbeat throbbed like a war drum against her ribs, but her stance remained still, unyielding, as solid as the ridge behind her. Kemp looked up at her. "Well now," he drawled, "seems you've been busy." Nita didn't answer. She lifted her father's hunting knife instead, blade glinting in the dying light. And for the first time since she set foot on Hadley's land, she didn't feel alone. The mountain stood behind her. Her father's spirit stood beside her. Fear was gone, burned out, replaced with something fierce and ancient. Her voice cut through the cold. "If you want this mountain," she raised the blade, her breath curled like smoke, "you'll have to step over my dead body first." The ridge was still echoing with the memory of last night's confrontation when the morning broke in hard metallic light. Snow glittered across the valley like hammered silver. Nita hadn't slept. She sat by the window until dawn, knife on the table, listening for engines. But the first sound she heard wasn't Vanguard. It was boots, fast, urgent, crunching through snow. Then a voice she recognized. "Don't shoot, unless you plan to scare the hell out of me before breakfast." Nita stepped outside just in time to see Marcus Webb climbing the slope, breath fogging the cold morning air, camera crew scrambling behind him. Marcus wore that familiar expression, half grin, half battle charge, the look of a man who smelled corruption the way a wolf smells blood. "You picked one hell of a place to start a war," he called out. Nita almost smiled. "You came faster than I thought." Marcus jabbed a thumb toward the two men behind him, one holding a shoulder camera, the other carrying audio gear. "You said Vanguard was prowling around. You think I'd miss the chance to catch them in their natural habitat?" The crew nodded respectfully at Nita, moving with the silence and precision of men who'd spent their lives documenting danger. They set up near the cabin, checking lenses, adjusting mics, preparing for something big. Marcus handed her a thermos. "Coffee, strong enough to wake the dead. You're gonna need it." Before Nita could reply, Sky snorted sharply and backed away from the fence. Engines again, this time from two directions. 3 black trucks rolled up the ridge, bigger, louder, dirtier than the night before. Kemp stepped out first, flanked by more men than earlier. Their faces were tight, calculating, the kind of men who thought rules were written for someone else. Kemp pointed at Nita before his boots even hit the snow. "You're obstructing legal development," he barked. "You broke into restricted caves. You're interfering with federal land surveys." Marcus snorted so loudly the nearest Vanguard contractor jumped. "Federal? You mean forged signatures, fake zoning approvals, and cash-only bribes? Those surveys?" Kemp's jaw tightened. Marcus stepped closer, his voice cutting like a cold blade. "Every accusation you throw at her goes on camera. Every threat, every lie. So by all means, keep talking." For the first time since she met him, Kemp hesitated. And that's when Sheriff Dalton Briggs arrived. His cruiser climbed the ridge slowly, tires kicking snow aside. Briggs stepped out, a tall, broad, sand-colored lawman whose voice was normally quiet but carried weight in every syllable. Today, however, he looked irritated, like he'd been dragged into something he didn't fully understand. "Nita Hale," he said sternly, "I've had 3 complaints filed against you this morning. Claims of trespassing, obstruction, assault, interfering with an active work site." "Sheriff," Marcus interrupted, "you might want to look at this before you finish that sentence." He handed over a tablet loaded with files. Vanguard's bribery emails, photos of burned campsites, geologic maps proving the mountain wasn't a work site. It was a gold mine of rare earth minerals worth millions. And photos Nita had taken of tire tracks, broken branches, shadowed figures at night. The sheriff scrolled slowly. His face changed even slower. Suspicion, confusion, then anger, deep, righteous anger. Finally, Briggs looked up at Kemp. "You've got a hell of a nerve filing complaints while trespassing on private land. And with this evidence, son, you're the one who's in trouble." "This is ridiculous," Kemp spat. Briggs cut him off, voice hard as iron. "Finish that sentence and I'll haul you in for intimidation and harassment." Kemp swallowed the rest of the words. Behind him, the Vanguard men shifted uneasily. Marcus whispered to Nita, "This is it. This is the crack we needed." Sheriff Briggs stepped toward the trucks, hands resting near his belt. Not on his gun, but close enough to remind every man watching that the law was here and not on their side. "Kemp Harrop," he announced, "you and your men are required to appear in county court for questioning, effective immediately." Kemp's face went pale. One of his contractors muttered, "We should leave." They backed toward their trucks, rattled in a way Nita had never seen. Kemp glared at her, hate simmering in his eyes, but he didn't touch his gun, didn't spit another threat, didn't even try to posture. They retreated, not defeated but shaken. And Nita, standing small against the wide, cold mountain, felt something shift inside her. Not fear, not even relief, but claim. She stepped forward, meeting the stares of older, richer, louder men who'd tried to crush her father, Hadley, and now her. Her breath misted in the air. Her voice was calm. "This mountain is not for sale." Marcus didn't even look away from his camera. "That," he whispered, "is going on the front page." And as the trucks vanished into the snowy forest, Marcus's headline began to write itself. "Apache woman stands alone against $1 million corporation and wins the first round." The afternoon sun sagged low over the ridge, casting long amber stripes across the snow when Nita heard footsteps, slow, uneven, dragging like someone who'd walked far and carried every mile with him. Sky lifted her head sharply, ears flicking forward. Even the wind seemed to hush. A figure emerged from the tree line, tall, broad-shouldered, wrapped in a dust-stained leather coat that looked older than the mountain itself. A thick, untrimmed beard covered the man's jaw, and his hair, once probably dark, was now streaked with gray. His boots were scuffed, his clothes worn thin from wandering. But it was his eyes, tired, hollowed, yet strangely relieved, that made Nita step off the porch, her hand instinctively brushing the knife at her belt. The man lifted both hands slowly, palms open. "I'm not here to scare you," he said, voice rough as gravel. "Name's Thomas Hadley." The world seemed to tilt for a heartbeat. Hadley, the owner of this land. The man everyone said was dead. He wasn't a ghost, but he looked like someone who'd lived too long among them. Nita didn't lower her guard, but she didn't move away either. "You're supposed to be gone." He huffed a quiet, weary laugh. "I was, or I tried to be." They sat beneath the porch awning, where the light softened and the cold felt less cruel. Hadley shrugged off his coat. It hit the wooden boards with a heavy thump, releasing a faint smell of pine, dust, and long travels. His hands trembled slightly, either from exhaustion or from stepping back onto land he'd never expected to see again. For a while, Nita let him breathe. People who spent years running didn't return all at once. Their stories needed time to uncoil. Finally, she asked, "You knew my father?" Hadley nodded slowly, and something in his expression cracked open. Gentle, grief-struck, honest. "Your father was a good man," he murmured. "Steady, brave, smarter than me. He saw things before anyone else did." He rubbed a hand across his beard, staring out at the pines as if the past still lived between them. "We worked the mountain together," he continued. "We found the caverns, found what they held, and we realized real quick that Vanguard wasn't going to let a discovery like that stay quiet." Nita listened without blinking. Hadley swallowed. "Your father didn't die in an accident. He died stopping men who'd already decided to take this mountain, no matter who they had to bury." The words hit like a punch. Nita's chest tightened, breath catching. But hearing it from the only man who knew the truth carved a deeper wound than she expected. She whispered, "Why didn't you tell anyone?" Hadley closed his eyes, shame dragging down his weathered face. "Because I ran." His voice shook. "They chased me, burned my cabin, tried to pin your father's death on me first. I barely made it out. And once I was running, I didn't know how to stop. 7 years, 7 winters, 7 springs, a lifetime spent hiding from men with money, power, and guns." Hadley opened his eyes again, tired but steadier now. "Your father died holding the line. I abandoned it. I abandoned him." Nita shook her head sharply. "You survived. There's no shame in that." Hadley huffed softly. "Maybe not, but I left the fight to someone else. I left it to you, turns out." He looked at her then, not like she was young, not like she was fragile, but like she was someone carved from the same mountain stone he and her father once trusted. "You stood on that porch and faced Kemp," he said. "I saw the trucks, saw his men scattering like coyotes. Your father would have been proud." Something warm flickered behind Nita's ribs. Small, fragile, fierce. Hadley leaned back against the railing, his voice barely above a breath. "I've been running all my life, Nita. But you stood still. You faced them." He paused, the mountains silent around them. "That's something I was never brave enough to do." Snow drifted lightly through the air, soft and weightless, settling on Hadley's coat and in Nita's braids. There was no romance in this scene, no spark, no longing, just 2 people bound by shared loss, shared truth, and the heavy responsibility of a mountain that demanded loyalty. For the first time since arriving on this land, Nita didn't feel alone. She murmured, "You came back for a reason." Hadley nodded, eyes glinting with quiet resolve. "I came back," he said, "because this time, I'm not running anymore." The storm that followed Kemp's retreat rolled across the valley like a drumbeat. But it wasn't thunder this time. It was noise from the outside world. By dawn the next day, the mountain wasn't quiet anymore. It buzzed with trucks on the highway, murmurs in nearby bars, debate in county halls, and headlines emerging like sparks flying from a fire. Marcus's article hit the National Wire Service before sunrise. By noon, Nita's name was everywhere. The Apache girl who stood against a giant and won the first-round Vanguard exposed in rare earth scandal. Federal protection order signed for Red Mesa Caverns. For years, Nita had been invisible, a wandering Apache girl who drifted from camp to camp, never staying, never rooted, never asked to be known. Now reporters were knocking on ranch doors across the county, asking about her. TV vans rolled through sleepy Idaho towns not built for this kind of attention. Talking heads on evening news programs discussed tribal land rights, corporate corruption, and one young woman who refused to back down. Nita watched bits of those broadcasts from the sheriff's laptop, sitting on an old wooden bench outside the cabin. She didn't smile. She didn't preen. She simply watched, silent and steady, absorbing the weight of what the country was seeing. A line the world hadn't been able to cross. Behind her, Hadley stood with arms folded, quietly astonished. "You know," he muttered, "I figured the mountain would take me to my grave. Didn't think it would lift you up this way." But Nita didn't feel lifted. She felt grounded, more than she ever had. The shift in the valley happened slowly at first, like snow melting in the early spring. People who once looked at her with suspicion started nodding politely when she rode by. Ranch families who had kept their distance for years now stepped out onto porches to wave. At the feed store, old-timers who used to whisper about the Apache girl living on the ridge now argued loudly about how she'd saved the county from becoming a corporate wasteland. Even Sheriff Briggs, usually stern and stone-faced as an old canyon, offered her a rare smile when he passed her at the general store. "You did good," he said. "Better than any of us." By the end of the week, folks were calling her something new, something said with respect instead of caution. The Apache girl who stood against a giant. Some said it proudly, some said it softly, some said it with awe, like the name itself had become part of the land's story. On the 8th night after Kemp's failed intimidation, the mountain grew quiet again. Not empty, but peaceful. The federal order had gone through. Survey teams were scheduled to arrive within days to secure the cavern system. Vanguard's legal team was in panic mode, and Marcus's documentary crew had enough footage to build an expose that would rattle boardrooms across the West Coast. But tonight, none of that mattered. Tonight, Nita stood inside her cabin, holding something soft and familiar. Her old deerskin dress, the one she had worn for years on the road, the one torn at the hem from crossing rocky slopes, faded from sun and fire. The one she had refused to bury, but no longer needed to wear. It wasn't clothing anymore, it was memory. A past that had shaped her, but no longer dictated who she had to be. She threaded a thin line of twine through the top seam and stepped carefully onto the wooden stool. Snow whispered outside the window. The cabin walls were warmed by lantern glow. Everything smelled of pine resin and old wood. Home, not just shelter. Slowly, deliberately, Nita hung the curtain across the window. The leather fell gently into place, soft and worn, catching the golden light like a relic from another life. It shifted slightly in the breeze, almost like it breathed with the room. She stepped back and let out a long, steady breath. The mountain wasn't a burden anymore. It wasn't a graveyard of her father's choices. Nita touched the deerskin curtain, feeling her past settle, not behind her, but beside her. Winter settled on the ridge slowly, like an old spirit claiming its place. The first storm rolled in from the north, sweeping across the valley with raw, biting wind that rattled the shutters and carved drifts against the cabin walls. Nita met it the way the mountain taught her, steady, unflinching, ready. Most mornings began the same way. She wrapped herself in a wool-lined coat, stepped into the crisp air, and began working before the frost thawed. She split firewood until the sweat steamed off her back. She patched gaps in the roof where snowmelt threatened to seep through. She rebuilt the horse corral from the bones of old timber Hadley left behind, driving each nail with a stubborn, quiet pride. Sky stood nearby, tail flicking frost, watching every movement as if approving the new order of things. The ridge felt different now, not hostile, not haunted, not burdened with secrets. It felt lived in, claimed, held by someone who understood it the way her father once did. In the evenings, she cooked simple meals on the old cast-iron stove, listening to the wood pop and crackle. The sound felt like conversation, warm, familiar, grounding. Sometimes Hadley joined her for supper, sharing stories of her father, how he laughed without fear, how he studied the mountain like it was alive, how he believed that every ridge and ravine carried its own heartbeat. The story stitched new strength into her chest. One quiet afternoon, snow drifting gently like ash, Nita sat at the small wooden table with a new leather-bound notebook. Her handwriting was sharp and patient as she filled each page with the truth. Her father's notes, Hadley's maps, the cavern system, the strange crystal, every danger, every betrayal, every ripple of the story. She wrote slowly, deliberately, ensuring that nothing would ever again be lost or buried or twisted by men like Kemp. "This is the part they won't be able to erase," Hadley said from the doorway, voice soft. Nita nodded without looking up. "No one else will have to run, not the way you and my father did." She wrote until her wrist ached, until the lantern burned low, until the house felt full of spirits who finally had their stories told. When the last page was done, she closed the notebook gently, almost reverently. This, not the USB, not the minerals, not the cavern, was the real inheritance. Truth preserved, names protected, a legacy no corporation could touch. That night, the ridge fell utterly silent. Snow blanketed the roof of the cabin in a soft, glittering shroud. The wind eased into a slow, steady whisper, the kind that wrapped around the chimney like an old lullaby. Nita stepped outside onto the porch, breath rising in silver clouds. Above her, the stars burned sharp and cold against the ink-black sky. She could almost feel the mountain breathing with her. She looked out toward the dark silhouette of the peaks, the same ones her father once walked, the same ones Hadley had fled across, the same ones she had finally chosen to defend. Her voice was barely more than a murmur, but the ridge carried it gently, like a message passed from branch to branch. "Father, I stopped running." The words didn't echo. They settled, warm, heavy, final. And for the first time in her life, the silence that followed didn't feel empty. Later, inside the cabin, she lifted the deerskin curtain, the same piece of clothing she had traveled in for years, sun-faded and scarred by the road. She hung it across the window, smoothing its edges until it lay evenly against the glass. In the lantern glow, the soft, worn leather looked like part of the house itself. Something rooted, something storied, something that belonged exactly where it was. Nita stepped back and let her hand rest gently on the fabric. It was her choosing to stay. The mountain had taken many things from her family, time, comfort, lives. But it had also given her something no wandering season had ever offered. A place to stop running, a place to begin living, a home. And as the snow piled softly outside, Nita Hale, daughter of the Red Mesa clan, survivor of loss, defender of the ridge, finally knew she had come to the end of the road only to discover the beginning. This mountain was hers and she was finally its.